Hi, everyone. Welcome to GIA's Knowledge Sessions. These are a series of talks and seminars about gemology that are
diamonds, but we're probably a little bit less familiar with the shape of rough diamonds. What kinds of shapes do we find diamonds in? All people would probably recognize this symbol of a diamond from a playing card. And this symbol's been around for, hundreds of years since we started using diamond crystals in jewelry, like this Roman ring from the 3rd or 4th century. Here's our diamond right there. So diamonds in their best, sort of most ideal form come in this shape of an octahedron. Now, diamonds aren't just used in their rough state in sort of antiquity. We even have some modern rough diamond jewelry shown here. We've got some octahedrons to having a carbon atom that's joined to 4 other carbon atoms building up this structure. So this is sort of a lowest energy configuration that the carbon atoms have a tendency to form in. Now, this is just one small unit cell, and you wouldn't really see a diamond that looks like this because it's sort of incomplete. It needs to grow a little bit bigger before it would form something that we would actually observe in nature. So right now, it looks like some of these carbon atoms are just kind of floating out in space. They're not really attached to anything. So let's draw some more unit cells around here. For instance, if we take this carbon atom down here, if we add a unit cell below it, well, you can see that carbon atom is actually bound to a carbon atom in this unit cell. If we draw another unit cell, well, we can see actually that carbon atom is bound here. And we could add more and more unit cells here made up of these little unit cells. Now, within this coordinate system, we can describe some other planes that sometimes we see within diamond crystals or modifications of diamond crystals. And the ones that are relevant for diamonds are these. So we just saw the octahedron, which is bound by 111 planes. Sometimes we also see forms that look like cubes, and those are bound by 100 planes, again, using this sort of nomenclature of the coordinate system. We also have dodecahedral planes that we would describe as being 110. And sometimes we see combinations of these most important planes. And this is something we would call a cubo-octahedron or a cube-octahedron, depending on who you ask. So back to the natural diamonds themselves. Here's an octahedron. I've drawn on it, trying to show some of the internal features here, because I was planning to cut it for research purposes. But what I want you to see is that the corners of this octahedron crystal and kind of the edges are a little bit rounded, and this reflects something that happens to octahedral crystals quite often when they're sitting in the mantle or during their volcanic transport up to surface. They get a little bit dissolved or resorbed. So this is something that happens after diamond growth. We see this phenomenon called resorption, which is sort of like dissolution or corrosion of the crystal by fluids or melts that can kind of change the crystal shape. And quite often we'll see octahedral crystals kind of develop into a more rounded form. The diamond can sort of be etched away. So here's an octahedron on the left, and you can see the edges have sort of been resorbed away. And on the right, here's another octahedron that's been resorbed even further. And you'll notice that actually the new surface that's appearing here isn't perfectly flat. It's got a little bit of a curve. Sometimes these irregular shapes can also result from the growth itself. So here's a very peculiar diamond that is probably controlled by a number of different factors during growth and post-growth processes, including resorption, that have made this diamond kind of resemble a swan, for lack of a better term. And you always end up finding these kind of irregularities the longer you look at some of these crystals. But let's go back to some of the more regular forms. So we talked about octahedral shapes. Sometimes octahedrons can either be elongated, making a prolate kind of octahedron, or they can be kind of flattened in their shape, making an oblate octahedron. This is an example of an oblate or flattened octahedron. And some people might guess that this is actually a macle shape, which is a kind of twin, but this is not a macle. This contains no twin plane within it. And if you looked at the opposite side of this, you would see exactly what you would expect for the opposite side of the crystal lattice. You would see one single crystal form throughout this entire shape. This is an octahedron that just happens to be flat for reasons that are open to your imagination. Now, beyond the octahedron, we also talked about some cube faces. These tend not to be very well pronounced. Most octahedron don't have any kind of modification into cube faces, but this particular one does. This is the only great example I've seen personally, but this is an octahedral diamond, and it has these little tiny square faces here that look actually pretty sharp, in my opinion. And I would describe this shape as a cubo-octahedral shape. Now, this is something you tend to see a lot more commonly in lab-grown diamonds that have been grown by the high-pressure, high-temperature synthesis method. This is a very common form to see those in, but in nature, cubo-octahedral diamonds are more rare. Here are some examples of more sort of cube or cuboid shapes, because they're not perfectly cubes. And these ones are gemmy. In a few slides, we'll see some that are not quite so gemmy. But these ones are gemmy. They're nice single crystals, and these could be cut and polished into beautiful gemstones. Here are some more unusual varieties of cubes, where here these cube or cuboid faces are actually